Hey y'all, Biohack here. It's time for another video. Actually, this is going to be kind of a follow-up to a video I made, 2 years ago? Almost 3 years ago now, talking about Ash Forest and grinding Deboreka necklaces and how that was insanely profitable. Well, obviously, that has come back up into the conversation recently after we had the increase to the max price of the Deboreka accessories. And a lot of people are very curious, like, how good is making the new Deborekas now that they're up to, at least on NA right now, you can almost sell the Tet belts at 99 billion silver. Like, what's the profit per hour? How much is each base Deboreka worth it? Should I sell it at Tet? Like, the Tets are sitting, so that implies that that's the best option. But what about hitting pen? Is that a good option? People are also making all this speculation about how the change to the Cron stone price is going to affect Deboreka and how much they cost and all this kind of stuff. So in this video, I kind of wanted to revisit the spreadsheet I made back from that video 3 years ago, update it for 2023 in terms of the stacks I would recommend that you use to enhance, and do some of the math on how profitable grinding Tet Deboreka belts is, in particular the belts, but we'll talk about the same logic applies to the necklaces and everything else. Like, the prices are all pretty much the same. It's just about how many hours you have to grind to get one of these things. But yeah, we'll talk about why I think Crypt of Resting Thoughts is definitely the best grind spot in the game in terms of money per hour. I think it pretty well. I don't know. People are pretty excited about the new Thornwood Forest with the lantern, but I think this is still going to top it in the long run, especially as we see Ominous Rings prices. I'm going to make the argument that Crypt of Resting Thoughts is the best grind spot in the game, hands down, at least right now in August of 2023. So if that's something you're interested in, stick around and we'll jump into the spreadsheet. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this spreadsheet. Like I mentioned earlier, this spreadsheet is derived from the one I had originally produced for that video about grinding Ash Forest to make Deborekas. However, a number of things have changed over the last few years in terms of how we do enhancing. And so the first thing we have to note here is in the cyan, I have gone ahead and changed the number of fail stacks I recommend using for different enhancement levels. You don't have to necessarily use these stacks. This is just sort of my general recommendation. I tried to make pretty reasonable guesses. The main thing that's different from the old video is we now see a lot more value in overstacking low-level accessories. So instead of using like a 40 stack for a duo, which is the soft cap, we decide to significantly overstack. I kind of mentioned that in the last video, but now that's definitely the case. You definitely want to overstack right now. The other thing that's changed a lot is ever since the value of pen accessories went up back in the day, since as has happened over the last 3 years, making pen accessories has become a lot more profitable, and making fail stacks has become a lot more expensive because of the Jatina system, which made the boss gear market completely collapse. So we generally don't want to push super high stacks anymore because the cost of losing the stack is higher, because you could have made a different pen accessory on a lower stack, so you lost that stack and therefore didn't generate that profit. And the other thing that's happened is pushing the stacks higher is more expensive because you can't really use boss gear because it's not worth anything on the market. So now I recommend using about a 275 stack for a pen Deboreka. So I think that's just useful to know, because people often ask me, what stacks do you recommend for Debo? And so this is what I'm going to give you. This isn't like necessarily super finely mathed out, because it's a little bit tricky as to what exactly the math you do is, since the items at base are permanently sold out and they don't have a strict value that you can just calculate all the math based on. But these are reasonable numbers. I will note that 58 is the hard cap for pry accessories, so that's why we choose that stack in particular. This is the one I would definitely recommend using. You cannot get higher than 90% success. So that's why we use that one. The rest of these are a little bit flexible, but this is what I'm going to recommend. Okay, so there you go. From there, we can essentially calculate our percent chance of success. From our percent chance of success, we have our total number of clicks that we're going to need to make, and then we have our total number of clicks that can fail and not downgrade. And so every time you click, we're going to use Cron stones for all of these, of course. That's definitely a big part of this. You always want to use Cron stones when you're using Deboreka, and we're going to talk a lot about Cron stones in a minute. So we have essentially like the number of downgrades that are, or fails that we're going to have that don't downgrade. We have the number of fails that we're going to downgrade. We have the number of cron stones that we're going to click. And then from there, we can calculate what actually matters, which is how many cron stones are we going to need? what is it going to cost us in Cron stones that are going to make it. When we have the success rates and everything else, we can also calculate the total number of bases that we're going to need to get to make one of a different enhanced level. And then the total value, it just comes from looking at the market and putting in the numbers based on the market. But from there, we can calculate what the thing is worth after you sell it and how much profit per necklace that you're going to get. So that's what we have here. In the yellow, we have total number of Cron stones used. Now, the main thing I want to talk to you about this when it comes to the Deboreka is how different Deboreka is up to Tet compared to a lot of other things that people use Cron stones on. In particular, the huge differential between the value of the Cron stones and the total value of the item. This is important when we're talking about making Deborekas to sell for profit, because a lot of people talk about, oh, Cron stones, like I need a costume Crons and it's so much more profitable with costume Crons and blah, 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 all about Cron stones. But the reality is that the Cron stones, when making Tet, the Cron stones represent a very small percentage of the overall cost of making the item versus other things in the game. For example, I talked about in my video talking about the Cron stone updates that happened in KR, how it was going to increase the cost of making a Pen Blackstar by like 70 billion silver. If we look at how much it costs to make a Pen Blackstar, like 85 to 90% of the entire cost of making that item is just in Cron stones. Deboreka is not like that at all. If a Tet is worth 97 billion silver, we're only going to spend about 17 billion silver on Cron stones to make it. So that differential is way, way lower, and that has important implications when we talk about costume versus vendor Crons, and we also talk about a potential increase in the cost of Cron stones. That statement falls off a lot when we look at the increase from Tet to Pen. The Tet is maybe, less than 20% of the total value is Cron stones, whereas the Pen is over half the value of the total 300 billion for a Pen Deboreka on the market is Cron stones. Of course, we're actually not going to sell Pen, and that kind of brings us into the next section here, which is, okay, so we have all these numbers here. What is the best level of Deboreka to sell and why? And so what we're interested in there is actually calculating our profit per necklace. This is, if we make this item using these fail stacks and using these, taxes and Crons, how much are we going to get for every single necklace that we grind? And what we see here is that we have a very low value for making prize. This is no surprise to anyone. Making prize is generally bad, just for everything. Duo is a little bit better at 1.2 billion. This is definitely better than just selling it on the market for like 850. Each base is worth 1.2. Try is even better still at 1.9. But finally, we get to Tet. And I don't know why Pearl Abyss has done this, but the way they've priced all the different enhancement levels of the Deboreka has made Tet way, way better than anything else. So currently, Tets are selling for 97 billion. Actually, to be fair, I think you could probably sell them for max. I think they do occasionally sell for that on NA. So if we say a Tet is worth 99 billion, everything else is already max. These are the max prices on the market. Actually, I think Pry hasn't updated all the way. But either way, these are the max prices on the market on NA right now. 99 billion for Tet translates to 5.154 billion silver per Deboreka. This is the same for all of them. They're all capped. Actually, the necklaces are selling a little bit cheaper, but it doesn't matter. 5.154 billion per necklace, belt, or earring. If we're talking about Crypt of Resting Thoughts and grinding Crypt, I think the general top tier grinders are pulling about one Deboreka belt every 2 hours. This means just in Deboreka belts, ignoring the trash, ignoring the Caphras, ignoring everything else you get from Crypt, which admittedly is not a lot, but still, ignoring all that stuff, just in Deboreka belts, we're looking at over 2.5 billion silver per hour if you take these belts up to Tet and sell them on the market. Now, to be fair, we're ignoring the fail stacks in here, but even still, these costs for fail stacks are trivial for like a 130 stack relative to the 99 billion that it sells for on the market. It's still very close to 5 billion silver per necklace, and you get one every 2 hours. So as of right now, I don't think there's anything in the game that even comes close to this. I know people are making a lot of money, like I said, in Thornwood Forest with the lantern, but even that I think struggles to compete with 2.5 billion silver per hour fairly consistently, and that's before you even consider the trash and everything else. So this is just amazing in terms of grinding. Like if you want to grind and make money, you better be making these belts. And I know there's a lot of people that did this actually as soon as the belts hit 99 billion after the price increase that we got a couple weeks ago. There were people that were listing like literally like 8 different Tet Debo belts that they made in the time to sell these. So this is not even something that's theoretical. This is something that people are actually doing right now, and they're probably going to be pissed at me for making this video. But to be fair, it's the same video I made 3 years ago. So yeah, crazy good money in Crypt. But there's okay. So we've established that, you know, like Crypt is amazing. This is not like for anyone who is kind of even without looking at the exact math, just napkin math. This has been obvious to all of us at Endgame for a long time that Crypt is by far the best money in the game. I've been saying this even before, like even if we look at the old price of Tet, which I think was 64 billion, it was still, you know, 1.5 billion silver an hour in belts if you're getting a belt every 2 hours, and that's before you consider the trash. So even before the buff, belts were still insanely good money per hour, and now there's nothing even close. They're amazing. Of course, grinding Crypt sucks. I hate grinding Crypt, but there's no denying that is insane money per hour. Okay, so, but what if I can't get costume crons, you said? Okay, well, we started talking about that earlier, about how cron stones affect the price of this. And so that's why I put in this little column over here. But here, let me give this a color right now so we can reference it when I'm talking about this. What hasn't been taken? Red. Okay, you'll see it in red. The cron value right there, you can make a copy of this spreadsheet. Just go to File and then Make Copy and edit this if you want. And you can put in any number you want for your taxes or your cron values. But if we say currently right now, a cron is 1.3526, that's what all these numbers are based on off the NA market. Even if we go ahead and increase this to 2, you'll notice that it doesn't actually make that big of an impact. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where the total number of cron stones you need to make a Tet is pretty small relative to the absolute value of the Tet. So even going to 2 mil cron stones only drops us from, what was it, let me put that number back in real quick, 1.3526, 5.154 to 4527. So, you know, it's like 600 mil per belt, which is not nothing. That's like 300 mil an hour, but you know, it's still very, very good, even with vendor crons. Even if we go ahead and we say, what if they give us the KR numbers and they make vendor crons 3 million silver? To be fair, there's no reason to probably pay that, because I don't think cron stones costumes are going to sell or sit if you know, they make that change just like they are in KR. But even if they're not, even if they're completely sold out, 3 million silver per cron stones is still 3.5 billion silver per Deboreka necklace. I think that's just absolutely crazy. That's, you know, still like 1.7 mil an hour just from the, or I said necklace, from the belts, right? Crazy good. Now, one thing that I didn't mention as we were entering these different numbers is the impact that has on the pen if we look at the profit per belt. Now, you probably would never ever want to sell a pen Deboreka because it's just way more profitable to sell at Tet. It's almost twice the value to sell at Tet versus pen, even using costume crons. But if we start to increase that cron value and we say that we're using vendor crons, now we're looking at you know, 235 mil per belt. Like, this is not even as good as just selling the bases on the market. That's because we need way more crons to make a pen relative to a Tet. Like I said earlier, the crons represent like half the cost of the total pen if we're using costume crons. I mean, they're you know, 75% or more if we're using vendor crons of the total value of the pen. So this is why people said, do you think pen belts will ever sit on the market? No. There's no reason for pen belts to ever sit on the market unless something crazy happens and the Tets just crash to nothing. But it's just way more profitable to sell at Tet than it is to sell at pen, which is why, you know, we're never going to see that. And that's exactly how it was in the old change. What we actually saw after you know, people started being able to grind Ash Forest for the Deboreka necklaces, we actually saw the necklace prices fall to like 50 billion, even though their cap is 64. We saw them fall to like 50 billion back in the day because it was still so good to grind those necklaces and sell them. Eventually, other spots came out that made more money per hour than Ash, which is why the necks eventually got completely sold out, and then everything got more expensive in general. But yeah, this is absolutely, you know, this is we're retracing the same steps that we traced 3 years ago with Ash Forest. And I think, this is, we'll probably see the belts crash a bit even below their 99 billion. And they'll probably sit there for a little while. And then eventually, as people make more money from other spots, they'll probably get sold out again, would be my guess. But I think this is something, if you can, you should definitely take advantage of. It's pretty cool. Yeah, really good money per hour from Crypt. That's the main takeaway from this. Also, that the impact of the Cron stones when you're making tets is pretty minimal, but overall, the impact when you're making a pen is much, much more significant because you need a lot more Crons relative to the number of bases going for pen to tet. So if you found this video helpful, subscribe to the channel. I will probably be making some more stuff in the near future, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.